All right, let's dive straight into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a really complex web of instability, historical grievances, and massive international competition that's unfolding right now in Burkina Faso and the wider Sahel region of Africa. You know, this is a topic that's been commanding major global attention lately, and honestly for very good reason. We're looking at a deeply layered situation where intense domestic turmoil is colliding head-on with global strategic interests. So let's break this whole thing down.
So the big question right off the bat, why is this specific region suddenly drawing so much intense focus from world powers? It's basically turned into a massive geopolitical tug-of-war. We've got regional actors, former colonial powers, and new global heavyweights all converging on Burkina Faso. But to actually understand why this is happening and what the stakes are, we need to peel back the layers and look at what's actually happening on the ground first.
Which brings us to part one of our explainer, the crisis in Burkina Faso, and specifically the domestic standoff.
Look, these recent military coups we've been seeing, they aren't just happening in a vacuum. They're being driven by widespread, really intense public anger over severe insecurity, weak governance, and just crushing economic hardship. The population is basically demanding solutions to everyday existential threats, and that sheer desperation has fundamentally shaken the country's entire political structure.
And when we talk about insecurity, it's extreme. Burkina Faso is caught in this terrifying dual-front security nightmare. They aren't just dealing with a localized insurgency, they are actively battling violent attacks from factions tied to both of the world's major extremist networks, Al-Qaeda on one side and ISIS on the other. It's a highly complex, chaotic, and incredibly dangerous environment that is just completely overwhelming local resources.
But before we get too deep into the geopolitics, we really have to acknowledge the staggering human toll here. We're talking about thousands of lives lost. And on top of that, the sheer scale of the violence has forced millions of people to flee their homes just to survive. It's triggered a massive displacement crisis across the entire region. I mean, it's a humanitarian emergency of just staggering proportions.
Now, let's look at part two, the French neocolonial legacy and the shifting alliances we're seeing today.
To really grasp the shifting sentiments in the region, we've got to talk about neocolonialism. Now, this isn't about direct colonial rule, with a foreign flag physically planted in the ground. Instead, it refers to the indirect control or influence that powerful nations still exert over weaker ones. And they usually do this through economic leverage, political maneuvering, or heavy military dependencies.
And this brings us directly to France, the former colonial power in Burkina Faso. Critics argue that France maintained a really heavy hand in the country long after formal independence, mainly through three avenues: ongoing military operations within their borders, deeply entrenched economic ties, and strategic political partnerships. For a lot of folks on the ground, these mechanisms kept the nation way too tightly bound to Paris, effectively limiting its true independence.
But, as you might have noticed in the news, that dynamic is undergoing a seismic shift right now. A long history of deep cooperation with France is quickly being replaced by a massive surge in anti-French sentiment. Basically, due to a severe lack of actual security improvements, despite years and years of a French military presence, the local population and their leadership grew incredibly frustrated with the status quo. Because of this, Burkina Faso has actively dialed back its cooperation with France and is urgently out there looking for new, alternative international partners.
Which naturally leads us to Section 3, a shifting geopolitical chessboard, and the global scramble to fill that void.
So with France's footprint shrinking, other external actors are rushing right in. Take Russia, for example. They're leaning heavily into security assistance and military cooperation, offering a very specific hard power type of partnership. Meanwhile, you have the United States, China, and Turkey taking a slightly broader approach, rapidly expanding their diplomatic, economic, and security initiatives. The chessboard is getting super crowded, and every single one of these nations is looking to protect its own strategic interests in the Sahel.
But this huge influx of new foreign actors creates a really profound dilemma. On one hand, sure, foreign intervention can sometimes offer immediate security improvements, kind of like a Band-Aid. But as impartial observers, we have to note that it also sparks intense concerns over national sovereignty. Are these nations just trading one form of dependence for another? And honestly, what happens when these competing global interests clash directly on Burkina Faso's soil?
We also can't forget the regional players in all this. Organizations like the African Union and ECOWAS are actively trying to promote democratic governance, conflict resolution, and overall stability. But man, they are facing a massive uphill battle. Their efforts are just constantly undermined by these repeated military coups and the sheer overwhelming nature of the security crises. To really get why this is happening, we need to look at Section 4, Roots of the Conflict, and how vulnerabilities are being exploited.
You see, the political instability at the top is actually being fueled from the bottom up by some brutal everyday realities. We're talking widespread poverty, crippling unemployment, the intensifying impacts of climate change, weak state institutions that just can't provide basic services, and fierce competition over natural resources. These aren't just background issues, you know? They are the active fuel making the entire region so incredibly volatile.
And here's the really crucial point. Extremist groups don't just rely on ideological persuasion to get people to join them. They actively weaponize these exact socioeconomic vulnerabilities. When people are faced with extreme poverty, zero resources, and no state support, extremists step right into that void. They use that desperation to recruit members and rapidly expand their influence. It's a vicious cycle.
So how do we fix it? That's Section 5, charting a sustainable path and balancing security with sovereignty.
Addressing a crisis of this magnitude requires moving far beyond just short-term military fixes alone. A truly sustainable future demands a balanced, structural approach. First, we need the building of stronger democratic institutions and better governance. Second, economic development absolutely must happen hand in hand with counterterrorism efforts. And third, and perhaps most critically, international assistance has to prioritize local ownership, respect for national sovereignty, and long-term capacity building. Any solution has to benefit the people of the region first and foremost.
Ultimately, we are left with one defining question. Can Burkina Faso and its neighbors successfully navigate this intense foreign competition and leverage international cooperation, all while maintaining their true national sovereignty? Finding that balance is really the only way to secure lasting peace, and it is honestly perhaps the greatest geopolitical tightrope walk of our time. So what do you think it will take for them to actually achieve this? Keep that in mind as you continue to follow this incredibly complex, unfolding situation.